Our story begins in the Age of Heroes, a time so distant that history blends seamlessly into mythology, where men supposedly lived for hundreds of years and giants walked alongside the children of the forest through woods that stretched from sea to sea. It was during this era, approximately 8,000 years before the events we know from recent history, that the long night descended upon the world. This was not merely a harsh winter or an extended season of cold. The long night was a darkness that lasted a generation, a winter without end where the sun became little more than a dim memory and death walked on legs of ice. In this apocalyptic time, when humanity faced extinction at the hands of the others and their army of the dead, heroes emerged to fight back against the darkness. Among them was Brandon Stark, who would become known to history as Bran the Builder, a figure so shrouded in legend that separating fact from fiction becomes nearly impossible. What we do know, or what the stories tell us, is that Brandon the Builder was not merely a warrior, but a constructor of impossible magnitude. He is credited with raising the Wall, that massive fortification of ice and ancient magic that spans the entire northern border of the realm. He is said to have designed Storm's End for his friend Durin Godsgrief, creating walls so thick and foundations so deep that no storm could shake them. But his greatest work, the achievement for which the North remembers him most clearly, was the construction of Winterfell itself. The castle rose on land that had particular significance, a place where hot springs bubbled up from deep within the earth, creating pools of heated water even in the depths of winter. This was no accident. The choice of location demonstrated a profound understanding of the challenges that would face any permanent settlement in the north. Without those hot springs, without the natural heating they provided, survival through the harsh northern winters would have been exponentially more difficult. The construction of Winterfell involved techniques that remain mysterious to this day. The walls are not merely stacked stone, but something more fundamental, as if the rock itself had been shaped and molded while still soft. Some Meisters dismiss this as poetic exaggeration, suggesting that the Starks simply employed exceptional stonemasons who took their secrets to the grave. Others, particularly those who have studied the wall closely, note similarities between its construction and the wall itself, both attributed to Brandon the Builder, both featuring techniques that seem to exceed normal human capabilities. Could there have been magic involved in Winterfell's founding? The first men had close relationships with the children of the forest, those ancient beings who commanded earth and tree, who could make stone as soft as clay when they wished. If Brandon the Builder had their assistance, as legend suggests he did, then the mysteries of Winterfell's construction become somewhat less mysterious. The original Winterfell was smaller than what we see today, of course. 8,000 years of additions, repairs, and expansions have created the sprawling complex that now dominates the landscape. But even in its earliest form, the castle was designed with purpose and foresight. The hot springs were channeled through the walls, creating a heating system that would keep the castle habitable even in the cruelest winter. The first crypts were dug deep into the earth beneath the castle, creating a repository for the dead that would eventually stretch for miles into the darkness. And most importantly, a heart tree was planted or preserved in the godswood, a massive weirwood with a face carved into its pale bark, where the old gods could be worshipped and where the magic of the children might linger. The defensive capabilities of Winterfell were carefully considered. The castle was positioned to command the surrounding territory, with clear sight lines in all directions across relatively flat terrain. Any approaching army would be visible long before it could threaten the walls. The construction of two massive curtain walls, one inside the other, created layers of defense that could bog down attackers even if the outer wall was breached. The emphasis was not on towering height, like the soaring spires of southern castles, but on thick, solid walls that could withstand both military assault and the more patient siege of winter itself. Following the long night and the defeat of the others, the world slowly returned to something approaching normalcy. The sun rose again, though the winter that followed the long night would take years to fully release its grip on the land. In this new age, the relationship between the first men and the children of the forest underwent a fundamental transformation. The wars that had characterized their earlier interactions, conflicts that had seen the children use their magic to shatter the arm of Dorne and create the swamps of the Neck in desperate attempts to halt the first men's advance, gave way to a historic agreement. The Pact, as it became known, was sealed on the Isle of Faces in the center of the God's Eye Lake. The terms were clear and for that era remarkably progressive. The first men would keep the open lands, the coastlands, the meadows and fields and highlands. But the deep forests, the ancient groves where the weirwoods grew thickest, would remain the domain of the children. No weirwood would be cut, no godswood disturbed. In exchange, the children would cease their magical warfare against humanity and accept that the age of their dominance was ending. Winterfell and House Stark became the keepers of this ancient pact in the north. The godswood was maintained with religious devotion, the heart tree tended and protected. Even as other regions of Westeros gradually abandoned the old gods in favor of the seven brought by the Andals, the north remained faithful. This was not mere tradition or stubborn conservatism. The Starks understood, perhaps better than any other house, that their strength was tied to the land itself, to the ancient magic that still lingered in the deep places, to their role as wardens and protectors of something far older than their family name. The relationship between Winterfell and the children of the forest during this period remains largely mysterious, obscured by the passage of millennia. But fragments of stories survive, passed down through countless generations. Tales of children appearing in the godswood to offer counsel or warning. Accounts of Stark lords seeking guidance from the green seers, those among the children with the power to see through the eyes of the weirwoods and perceive events both near and distant. These may be nothing more than fireside tales, stories that grew in the telling until they bore little resemblance to whatever truth might have spawned them. Or they may represent genuine history, evidence of a partnership that endured for centuries or even millennia after the pact was sealed. What we know with more certainty is that the early Stark lords expanded their power gradually but inexorably throughout the north. The system of vassal houses that would eventually comprise northern nobility began to take shape. Some houses bent the knee willingly, recognizing that the Starks of Winterfell commanded resources and military strength that made resistance futile. Others required more. Persuasion, whether through marriage alliances, demonstrations of martial prowess, or outright conquest. The North is the largest of the seven kingdoms in terms of territory, nearly equal to all the others combined, and bringing such vast lands under unified rule was the work of generations. The establishment of Winterfell as not just a fortress, but as a seat of governance required the development of administrative systems and legal traditions. The Starks became known for their justice, harsh but fair, embodying a principle that would become their house words: winter is coming. This was not merely a statement about weather patterns, but a fundamental philosophy of life. In the North, where winters could last for years and where unprepared people died by the thousands, justice meant ensuring that everyone contributed to survival, that no one was permitted to endanger the community through selfishness or stupidity. For thousands of years, the Starks ruled the North not as lords but as kings, styling themselves the Kings of Winter, a title that carried profound meaning in a land where winter was the ultimate enemy and the ultimate test of worthiness to rule. These Kings of Winter faced challenges that southern monarchs could scarcely imagine. They fought not only against rival houses and external invaders, but against the land itself, against winters that could break even the strongest will, against famines that turned neighbor against neighbor, and against the constant pressure of the unknown threats that lurked beyond the wall. One of the most famous of these ancient kings was Theon Stark, known to history as the Hungry Wolf. His reign occurred during the Andal invasion, that massive migration from Essos that conquered or converted most of southern Westeros. The Andals brought with them iron weapons superior to the bronze used by the first men, a new religion that worshipped 7 aspects of a single god, and an aggressive expansionism that saw the old dynasties of the south either destroyed or absorbed through marriage. When the Andals crossed the Neck in significant numbers, King Theon met them with cold northern steel and colder northern fury. The Hungry Wolf's campaigns against the Andals became legendary throughout Westeros. He did not simply defend the North's borders, but launched counterattacks deep into Andal-invaded territory, burning holdfasts and seizing Andal warriors. But Theon Stark's most controversial act, the one that earned him his fearsome sobriquet, was his decision to sacrifice these captured Andals to the old gods in the godswood of Winterfell. The morality of such sacrifices, even in a time of existential threat, remains debatable. But the effectiveness of Theon's ruthless tactics cannot be questioned. The Andals learned that the North would not fall as easily as the southern kingdoms had, and while individual Andal knights and even small groups found service with northern houses over the centuries, no mass invasion ever succeeded in conquering the region. Other kings of winter left their marks on Winterfell and the North in different ways. Brandon the Breaker supposedly put down the Night's King, that legendary 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who took a female other as his bride and ruled from the Night Fort for 13 years before being destroyed by a combined force led by the King Beyond the Wall and the King of Winter. Whether this Brandon was a Stark and whether the Night's King was himself a Stark, as some stories suggest, remains uncertain. But the tale established the Starks' role as defenders against supernatural threats, a responsibility that would come full circle thousands of years later. Roderick Stark, called the Wandering Wolf, supposedly won the neck from the Marsh Kings and established House Reed as vassals of Winterfell, giving the Starks control over the crucial narrow passage between North and South. Rickard Stark led northern forces in wars against the Iron Islands, that constant source of reaver raids that plagued the western coast. Numerous Brandon Starks, Torrhen Starks, and Cregan Starks followed one another, each adding their own chapters to the long history of Winterfell, each buried eventually in the crypts beneath the castle with an iron sword laid across their lap and a stone direwolf at their feet. The kings of winter also faced threats from within the North itself, from ambitious lords who saw opportunities to seize power or from isolated houses that rebelled against Stark authority. The Boltons of the Dreadfort represented the most persistent of these internal challenges. For centuries, possibly even millennia, the Boltons fought against Stark dominance, seeking to establish themselves as the paramount power in the North. Their practice of flaying their enemies alive, of wearing the skins of defeated foes, marked them as perhaps the most cruel of northern houses, a reputation that would persist into modern times. The conflict between Stark and Bolton became embedded in northern culture, a struggle between two competing philosophies of rule. The Starks led through a combination of strength and honor, earning loyalty through fair dealing and consistent justice. The Boltons ruled through fear, maintaining control through terror and the certain knowledge that defiance would be met with punishment so severe that death would seem a mercy. This fundamental difference in approach made the conflict between the houses about more than just political power. It was a war over the very soul of the North, a question of what kind of people Northerners would become and what kind of leadership they would accept. The exact details of when the Boltons finally bent the knee to Winterfell remain lost to history, but by the time of Aegon's conquest, they were firmly established as vassals of House Stark, required to answer the call to war and provide troops when the Starks demanded. The flayed man remained their sigil, a reminder of their dark past, but the practice of actually flaying prisoners was supposedly abandoned. Of course, as later events would prove, the Boltons' acceptance of Stark rule was always conditional, always accompanied by lingering resentment and a willingness to betray their oaths when opportunity presented itself. Winterfell's history cannot be separated from its relationship with the Night's Watch and the Wall. While the wall stood hundreds of miles to the north of the castle, protecting the realms of men from whatever lurked in the far north, Winterfell served as the critical link between that distant fortification and the populated regions it protected. The Starks took their responsibility as wardens seriously, understanding that the wall's survival depended on continued support from the south. In the early days following the Long Night and the wall's construction, the Night's Watch was perhaps the most prestigious military order in Westeros. To take the blackened man, the wall was considered a great honor, and younger sons of noble houses competed for positions that would allow them to distinguish themselves in defense of humanity. The Night's Watch was well-supplied, well-staffed, and maintained all 19 of its original castles along the wall. The relationship between the Watch and Winterfell during this period was one of mutual respect and close cooperation. But as centuries became millennia and the memory of the Long Night faded into legend, the Night's Watch gradually declined in prestige and resources. The far north became something of a joke in southern kingdoms, a frozen wasteland populated by nothing more threatening than primitive wildlings. Fewer volunteers joined the Watch, and the organization increasingly relied on criminals given the choice between execution and taking the black. The southern kingdoms reduced their support, viewing the Watch as an unnecessary expense for an imaginary threat. Only the north, only Winterfell, maintained the old traditions and continued to send resources and men northward. The kings of Winter, and later the lords of Winterfell, made regular visits to the wall, inspecting its defenses and speaking with the Lord Commander about the Watch's needs. When ranging parties went missing beyond the wall, it was often Stark men who volunteered to search for them. When wildling raids crossed the wall and threatened northern villages, Winterfell coordinated the response. And when the Watch called for help in suppressing major wildling incursions, the Starks answered with their full strength. This relationship benefited both parties. The Night's Watch received the material and military support necessary to maintain their mission. Winterfell gained advance warning of any threats emerging from beyond the wall and maintained influence over an organization that, while diminished, still commanded the realm's most formidable defensive fortification. The Starks also used the Night's Watch as a convenient destination for men who had committed crimes but whom the Starks were reluctant to execute. A poacher caught taking a deer from the Wolfswood might be given the choice between losing a hand or taking the black. It was a merciful form of justice that served multiple purposes. The Watch also provided Winterfell with a Aegon source of information about the lands beyond the wall. Rangers who had spent years or even decades patrolling the haunted forest brought back knowledge of wildling movements, reports of strange occurrences, and warnings about unusual weather patterns that might presage a harsh winter. This intelligence network, such as it was, helped the Starks prepare for threats that might emerge from the north. The arrival of Aegon Targaryen and his dragons in Westeros 300 years before our current story represents one of the most significant turning points in Winterfell's history. For the first time in 8,000 years, the castle and the north it commanded faced a threat that conventional military force could not defeat. The Targaryen dragons had already demonstrated their devastating effectiveness in southern battles, reducing armies to ash and castles to molten ruins. When word reached Winterfell that Aegon demanded submission from all 7 kingdoms, King Torrhen Stark faced an impossible decision. Torrhen was by all accounts a capable military commander and a wise ruler. He assembled the largest army the North had fielded in living memory, 30,000 men, and marched south to meet the Targaryen threat. But before crossing the neck, Torrhen took counsel with his advisors and his bastard brother, Brandon Snow. The question before them was brutally simple. Should they fight Aegon's dragons, almost certainly die in the attempt, and watch the North burn for their defiance, or should they submit and preserve the North intact at the cost of their independence? Brandon Snow supposedly urged war, even proposing a desperate plan to send assassins to kill the dragons in their sleep. Whether this plan could have succeeded remains one of history's great unanswered questions. But Torrhen made a different choice. He sent his army home and traveled south, with only a small retinue to bend the knee to Aegon Targaryen. For this decision, some called him Torrhen the King Who Knelt, turning what was arguably the wisest decision any king of winter ever made into an insult. But Torrhen understood what many proud rulers did not. The dragons changed everything. No amount of courage or skill at arms could overcome creatures that breathed fire hot enough to melt stone. By submitting, Torrhen preserved the north. While kingdoms that resisted, like Dorne or the Storm Kingdom before its defeat, suffered dragonfire and death, the north passed into Targaryen rule without a single northern death. The Starks retained Winterfell, retained their command over their vassal houses, retained everything except the title of king. They became wardens of the north, ruling in the name of the Iron Throne, but maintaining the same authority they had always possessed over their territory. It was, in effect, a brilliant political maneuver disguised as submission. The integration of Winterfell into the Seven Kingdoms changed some aspects of northern life while leaving others untouched. The Starks were now required to send representatives to King's Landing when summoned, to provide troops for royal wars, and to accept ultimate authority residing in the Iron Throne rather than at Winterfell. But in practical terms, the North remained largely independent. The southern kingdoms might view northerners as backward and uncivilized, clinging to their old gods and old ways, but they also recognized that the North was too vast and too remote to govern from King's Landing. The Targaryens were content to leave the Starks in charge as long as taxes were paid and levies answered when called. The 3 centuries of Targaryen rule saw Winterfell involved in several major conflicts that shook the Seven Kingdoms. The castle remained always the seat of northern power, but how that power was wielded varied dramatically depending on who held Winterfell and what conflicts demanded their attention. The Dance of the Dragons, that devastating civil war between rival Targaryen claimants, saw the North play a crucial role under Lord Cregan Stark. When Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen called for northern support against her brother Aegon II, Cregan answered with a massive host that marched south. The Winter Wolves, as the Northern Army became known, fought with a ferocity that impressed even hardened Southern knights. But by the time they reached King's Landing, the war had effectively ended with both primary claimants dead. Cregan's response to this situation demonstrated the political acumen that had allowed the Starks to thrive for millennia. Rather than simply returning north with his army, Cregan assumed the position of Hand of the King for 6 days, using his authority to dispense justice and tie up loose ends from the war. This period, known as the Hour of the Wolf, saw Cregan execute those responsible for crimes during the war while also showing mercy to others, demonstrating that northern justice could be both harsh and fair. His actions earned him respect throughout the realm, while ensuring that the Targaryens remembered the North's importance. He then married his son to a daughter of House Blackwood, arranged beneficial matches for others in his party, and returned north, having gained advantage for the North without technically rebelling or overstepping his authority. Throughout the Targaryen era, Winterfell underwent various expansions and improvements. The castle that Aegon's men first saw when Torrhen knelt was already ancient, but it was not yet the sprawling complex it would become. Additional walls were raised, new towers added, the defensive capabilities enhanced. The hot springs were channeled to heat even more of the castle, making Winterfell comfortable even in the depths of winter when other northern castles became barely habitable. The crypts expanded ever deeper as generation after generation of Starks were laid to rest beneath the castle, iron swords across their laps to keep vengeful spirits from rising. The Starks maintained their unique identity throughout this period, refusing to adopt southern customs or abandon the old gods despite pressure to conform. While most of the realm worshipped the Seven, Winterfell's godswood remained the spiritual center of the castle. While southern knights emphasized elaborate tourneys and complex codes of chivalry, northern warriors trained in practical combat skills necessary for survival in a harsh land. While southern lords built soaring castles designed to impress, Winterfell remained solid and functional, built to endure rather than to dazzle. The reign of Aerys II Targaryen, the Mad King, brought new challenges to Winterfell and ultimately led to the kingdom's independence from Targaryen rule. When Brandon Stark, son of Lord Rickard, rode to King's Landing to demand the release of his sister Lyanna and challenge Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, he triggered a sequence of events that would see the Stark family nearly destroyed and the Targaryen dynasty overthrown. Aerys arrested Brandon and his companions, then summoned Brandon's father Rickard to answer for his son's crimes. What followed was a mockery of justice that shocked the entire realm. Aerys burned Rickard alive while forcing Brandon to watch, strangling himself in a futile attempt to save his father. The murder of a great lord and his heir, killed without trial or cause beyond the Mad King's paranoid delusions, made rebellion inevitable. When Aerys demanded that Jon Arryn deliver the heads of his wards, Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon, Arryn refused and raised his banners in revolt. Winterfell during the rebellion was held by Eddard Stark, who had become Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North through the deaths of his father and brother. He called the northern banners and marched south to war, leaving the castle garrisoned but largely emptied of its fighting men. The war lasted over a year, seeing victories and defeats on both sides before culminating in Robert's triumph over Rhaegar at the Trident and the sack of King's Landing that ended Targaryen rule. When Eddard returned to Winterfell after the war, he brought with him a bastard son named Jon Snow, supposedly conceived during the war. The presence of this bastard in Winterfell, raised alongside Eddard's legitimate children, would become a source of tension with his wife Catelyn Tully, but also demonstrated Eddard's commitment to responsibility and honor. He also brought the memories of the war, of his sister's death, and of the promises he had made to her, secrets that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The years following Robert's rebellion marked a period of relative peace for Winterfell. Eddard proved to be an excellent lord, governing with the same combination of justice and mercy that had characterized the best Stark rulers. He strengthened relationships with vassal houses, maintained the Night's Watch, administered justice fairly, and prepared the North for the winter that was always coming. His wife Catelyn bore him 5 children, complementing the bastard Jon, and Winterfell became a place where a new generation of Starks grew up learning to rule. To understand Winterfell fully, we must examine the castle itself, the physical structure that has stood for 8 millennia, and the mysteries contained within its walls. The castle is not beautiful in the way southern keeps are beautiful. There are no soaring spires or delicate towers, no elaborate gardens or ornate carvings. Winterfell is built for function, designed to protect its inhabitants from both military enemies and the brutal northern climate. The castle is protected by 2 massive curtain walls, one within the other. The outer wall stands 80 feet high and encompasses a significant territory including yards, stables, kennels, workshops, and housing for guards and servants. The inner wall is lower but thicker, designed to provide a final defensive position if the outer wall is breached. The gates are reinforced with iron and can be sealed from within, while murder holes in the gatehouse allow defenders to rain death on anyone attempting to force entry. But the most remarkable feature of Winterfell is not its walls or its towers, but the hot springs that well up from deep beneath the castle. These springs, heated by volcanic activity far below the surface, provide water that remains warm even in the harshest winter. Early builders channeled this water through the walls, creating a central heating system that makes Winterfell uniquely comfortable among northern castles. The Great Hall can be kept warm enough that lords feast in comfort while outside the snow piles 10 feet deep. The glass gardens built over the hottest springs allow fruits and vegetables to grow year-round, providing fresh produce even when the rest of the north is frozen solid. This heating system represents a level of engineering sophistication that raises questions about how it was achieved 8,000 years ago. The channels that carry the heated water through the walls are precisely constructed, angled to promote proper flow and maximize heat distribution. Maintaining this system over millennia required constant attention from the castle's stewards and a detailed knowledge of how the system functioned. Some Meisters speculate that the original design was even more sophisticated than what remains today, with sections that have been blocked or damaged over the centuries, reducing the system's efficiency. The crypts of Winterfell extend deep into the earth beneath the castle, far deeper than any military purpose would require. These burial chambers, carved from solid rock, contain the remains of Stark lords and kings going back to the castle's founding. Each lord is buried with an iron sword across his lap, supposedly to keep the vengeful spirits of the dead from walking. Stone direwolves, the sigil of House Stark, keep silent watch over their masters. The oldest sections of the crypts, those that contain the remains of the first kings of winter, are so ancient that the names have worn away from the stone, leaving only weathered statues to mark the graves. The crypts extend so far that even the Starks don't know exactly how deep they go. The lower levels, rarely visited, are said to be partially collapsed in places, making exploration dangerous. Legends speak of passages that lead even deeper, of chambers sealed since before recorded history, of secrets buried so long ago that their very nature has been forgotten. Some claim these sealed sections connect to underground rivers or to natural caverns that extend for miles. Others whisper that the depths of the crypts were designed not to keep the dead in, but to keep something else out. The Godswood of Winterfell occupies 3 acres within the castle walls, a forest preserve that has remained essentially unchanged since the castle's founding. The Heart Tree, a massive weirwood with a face carved into its trunk, stands at the center beside a cold, dark pool. The face is not decorative but functional, part of the old religion's belief that the children of the forest and their greenseers could see through the eyes of the weirwoods. The tree's leaves are red as blood, and its pale bark is marked with what appears to be red sap, but which legend calls the blood of the tree. The Godswood represents a piece of the ancient forest preserved within the castle, a reminder of the world that existed before humans came to Westeros. The other trees within the Godswood, oaks and ironwoods and sentinels, have grown undisturbed for thousands of years, creating a dense canopy that blocks out much of the sky. Within this shadowed grove, the Starks have always performed their devotions, praying to gods that have no names and no faces except what humans carve into the weirwoods. This adherence to the old gods, maintained even when the rest of Westeros converted to the Seven, represents the Starks' commitment to tradition and their understanding that they are part of something older and more fundamental than the kingdoms of men. Winterfell during times of peace functioned as both fortress and seat of government, requiring constant attention from dozens or even hundreds of people to maintain operations. The Lord's primary responsibilities included administering justice, managing relationships with vassal houses, maintaining the castle's defenses, and ensuring adequate preparation for winter. These duties demanded skills in judgment, diplomacy, military strategy, and resource management. The Great Hall served as the center of castle life, a massive chamber heated by the hot springs where the Lord held court, received petitions, and made decisions affecting thousands of people. The hall could accommodate hundreds of people for feasts and celebrations, with tables arranged to reflect social hierarchy and benches for lesser folk. The high table, elevated on a platform, provided the Lord and his family with a commanding view of the proceedings while emphasizing their position above other attendees. Justice in Winterfell followed northern traditions that emphasized direct lord-peasant relationships rather than the elaborate legal codes common in the South. The Lord heard cases personally, questioned participants, and rendered judgment based on a combination of law, custom, and personal discretion. Punishments could be severe for crimes that endangered the community. Theft of food stores during winter might result in the loss of a hand, while murder or rape typically meant execution. But the Starks also showed mercy when circumstances warranted, understanding that desperation could drive good people to bad actions. The castle's master-at-arms trained young men in combat skills essential for survival in the north. The training yard saw constant activity as squires, and young warriors practiced with swords, spears, and bows. Northern fighting styles emphasized practical effectiveness over the elaborate techniques favored in southern tourneys. A northern warrior needed to be able to fight in snow, in forests, against opponents who might be using captured weapons or improvised tools. The goal was not to win glory in formal combat, but to survive actual warfare. The glass gardens demonstrated Winterfell's unique ability to defy the northern climate. Built over the hottest springs, these structures used panes of yellow glass to create greenhouses where fruits, vegetables, and even flowers could grow regardless of external weather. The gardens required constant tending from dedicated gardeners who understood the delicate balance of heat, moisture, and light necessary for plants to thrive. The produce from the glass gardens supplemented the castle's food stores and provided fresh ingredients even in the depths of winter, when most of the north survived on preserved foods. The kennels housed Winterfell's dogs, including hunting hounds, guard dogs, and war dogs trained to fight alongside men in battle. The stark connection to dire wolves, their house sigil, and supposedly their distant ancestors made them particularly attentive to their canine companions. A good hunting dog was valued almost as highly as a war horse, and the care of the kennels occupied several full-time handlers. The rookery, housed in a tower specifically designed for the birds, contained ravens that served as Winterfell's primary means of long-distance communication. The Maester, who managed the rookery, trained birds to fly to specific castles throughout the north and beyond, enabling messages to be transmitted across hundreds of miles within days. The security of the rookery was crucial, since intercepted messages could reveal military plans or political secrets. The arrival of King Robert Baratheon at Winterfell, traveling north with his entire court to offer Eddard the position of Hand of the King, set in motion events that would see the Stark family scattered across 2 continents, and Winterfell itself changing hands multiple times. Eddard's agreement to serve as Hand, driven by loyalty to his old friend and concern about the Lannisters' growing power, meant leaving Winterfell in the care of his eldest son Robb, while he traveled south with his daughters Sansa and Arya. The discovery of the direwolf pups, one for each of Eddard's children including Jon Snow, seemed like a sign from the old gods. The direwolf was the sigil of House Stark, but living direwolves had not been seen south of the Wall in 200 years. Finding 6 pups, the mother dead but the pups alive, felt like a message, though what message remained unclear. Each child bonded with their wolf, creating connections that would prove crucial in the desperate times ahead. Bran Stark's fall from a tower window after witnessing Queen Cersei and her brother Jaime, an intimate embrace, nearly killed the boy and left him crippled. The assassination attempt that followed while Bran lay unconscious revealed that someone wanted the boy dead badly enough to send a killer into Winterfell itself. Catelyn's journey south to warn Eddard of the threat, leaving Winterfell in Robb's hands, meant the castle's leadership fell to a boy of 14, unprepared for the responsibilities suddenly thrust upon him. When news reached Winterfell of Eddard's arrest and execution, the north exploded in fury. Robb called the banners, and the northern lords answered with a vengeance. 20,000 men assembled at Winterfell before marching south to war, their young lord leading them despite his age and inexperience. Robb left Bran, still crippled and only 10 years old, as acting Lord of Winterfell with Maester Luwin and others to advise him. The castle, stripped of most of its fighting men, held only a garrison sufficient to man the walls and no more. Robb's departure meant Winterfell became a place of waiting, of maintaining normal operations while anxiety gnawed at everyone within the walls. Word came of victories in the south, of Robb winning battle after battle against Lannister forces, earning his nickname the Young Wolf. But the castle that had stood for 8,000 years now faced threats from unexpected directions. Theon Greyjoy, Eddard Stark's ward who had been raised at Winterfell since childhood, betrayed the family that had sheltered him. Sent by Robb to treat with his father Balon Greyjoy for an alliance against the Lannisters, Theon instead turned cloak when his father chose to attack the north while it was stripped of defenders. The Ironborn raids devastated the northern coastline, and Theon led a small force in a lightning attack on Winterfell itself. The capture of Winterfell by Theon's few dozen Ironborn represented one of the greatest shames in the castle's history. The ancient seat of House Stark, the castle that had never fallen to enemy attack in 8 millennia, was taken through treachery by a former ward with fewer men than it took to properly garrison the walls. Theon's rule over the castle was brief and marked by his desperate attempts to win respect from men who saw him as a traitor and a fool. The supposed burning of Winterfell, with the bodies of 2 boys presented as Bran and Rickon Stark, sent shockwaves throughout the north. In truth, Bran and Rickon had escaped with the help of Osha the Wildling and Hodor the stable-boy, hiding in the crypts beneath the castle while Theon displayed the murdered bodies of a miller's sons in their stead. But to the world, it appeared that the Stark line had been extinguished, that the castle which had stood for 8,000 years had finally fallen. The actual burning of Winterfell came not from Theon, but from Ramsay Snow, bastard of Roose Bolton, who attacked under the pretext of liberating the castle. The Boltons slaughtered the Ironborn and put much of the castle to the torch before withdrawing, leaving Winterfell a smoking ruin. The damage, while extensive, was not complete. The walls still stood, the inner structures were damaged but not destroyed, and the hot springs continued to flow beneath the scorched stones. The Bolton Occupation of Winterfell represented a dark chapter in the castle's history, a perversion of everything the Starks had built and maintained for 8,000 years. Roose Bolton, having betrayed Robb Stark at the Red Wedding and been rewarded with the position of Warden of the North by the Iron Throne, claimed Winterfell and began the process of rebuilding what his bastard son had burned. But the rebuilding was superficial, focused on making the castle functional rather than restoring it to its former glory. The Boltons lacked the resources and the inclination to properly repair the extensive damage. Sections of the castle remained ruined and unusable. The glass gardens, shattered by fire and left exposed to the elements, could not produce food. The Great Hall, though cleared of debris and made serviceable, bore the scars of burning on every surface. Ramsay Snow, legitimized as Ramsay Bolton and named his father's heir, made Winterfell into a place of horror. The dungeons beneath the castle, originally built to hold prisoners awaiting judgment, became torture chambers where Ramsay practiced his sadistic art. His treatment of Theon Greyjoy, whom he captured after the burning of Winterfell and slowly transformed into the broken creature called Reek, demonstrated the depths of depravity that now infected the ancient castle. The forced marriage of Ramsay to Sansa Stark, used to legitimize Bolton rule through connection to the Stark name, added another layer of tragedy to Winterfell's occupation. Sansa, who had survived horrors in King's Landing and nearly died during her escape with Petyr Baelish, found herself a prisoner in her own childhood home, married to a monster in her family's hall, sleeping in her parents' bed while Ramsay inflicted physical and psychological torment. The people of the castle, those who had served the Starks for generations, survived under Bolton rule through a combination of compliance and subtle resistance. They could not openly rebel without facing flaying or worse, but they also did not embrace their new masters. The old servants remembered the Starks, remembered how the castle should be governed, and waited for an opportunity to see their true lords return. The announcement that Jon Snow had been named king in the north by the northern lords who had rallied to retake Winterfell from Ramsay Bolton sparked hope throughout the castle in the north. Jon, though a bastard in name, was Eddard Stark's acknowledged son and had been raised at Winterfell. His leadership of the Night's Watch and his role in defending the wall against wildling attacks had earned him respect. When he left the Watch after dying and being resurrected, technically fulfilling his oath to serve until death, and rallied support to retake Winterfell, he became the focus for those who wished to see House Stark restored. The Battle of the Bastards, fought on the fields before Winterfell between Jon Snow's forces and Ramsay Bolton's larger army, determined the castle's fate and the future of the North. Jon's forces, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, seemed doomed to defeat as Bolton cavalry surrounded them and began systematically crushing the trapped soldiers. But the arrival of Pater Baelish with the Knights of the Vale, brought by Sansa's secret negotiations, turned certain defeat into sudden victory. Ramsay fled to Winterfell, securing himself within the castle walls, while Jon's combined forces laid siege. But the restoration of Stark rule could not be delayed by a prolonged siege. Wun, the last giant, broke through the gates in a final act of heroism that cost his life, but opened Winterfell to Jon's forces. The subsequent combat within the castle saw Ramsay defeated in single combat by Jon Snow, though it was Sansa who delivered the final judgment, feeding Ramsay to his own hounds in a form of poetic justice that he would have appreciated. The restoration of Winterfell to House Stark meant more than simply changing the banners on the walls. The castle required extensive repairs to address the damage from both the burning and the Bolton occupation. The glass gardens needed to be completely rebuilt. The Great Hall required cleaning and refurbishing. The chambers that had been torture rooms needed to be cleared and converted back to storage or other uses. Throughout the castle, the signs of Bolton occupation had to be removed and replaced with proper Stark symbols and practices. The arrival of Daenerys Targaryen at Winterfell with her armies and dragons represented an unprecedented moment in the castle's history. Dragons had never visited Winterfell before. The arrival of two massive creatures, each capable of destroying the castle in an afternoon if they chose, created understandable anxiety among the northern lords who remembered the stories of Harren the Black and his castle melted by dragon fire. But the greater threat of the Night King and his army of the dead forced an alliance between North and Dragon Queen. Winterfell became the staging ground for the defense of the living against the dead. The castle's defenses were enhanced with trenches, spikes, and other obstacles designed to slow the undead advance. Every able-bodied person within the castle was armed and given a position in the defensive plan. The crypts, ironically, were designated as the safest place for those who could not fight, a decision that would prove tragically wrong when the Night King's magic reanimated the dead buried there. The Battle of Winterfell, the longest night in the castle's long history, saw the dead assault the walls in numbers that seemed endless. The defenders fought with desperate courage, knowing that defeat meant death and resurrection as undead slaves. The dragons provided crucial air support, burning thousands of wights, but even dragon fire seemed insufficient against the overwhelming numbers. The tide of battle shifted multiple times, with the living pushed back again and again. The crypts, where non-combatants had sheltered, became a nightmare when the dead Starks burst from their tombs. The reanimated corpses of lords and ladies who had been at rest for hundreds or thousands of years attacked the living who had sought safety in their presence. The irony was bitter. The Starks had been buried with iron swords to keep them from rising, but the Night King's power exceeded whatever magic had been used to restrain them. The death of the Night King, killed by Arya Stark in the Godswood beside the Heart Tree, ended the battle instantly as every White and White Walker collapsed into harmless corpses. The castle had survived, but at terrible cost. Thousands were dead, the defenses were ruined, and the exhausted survivors faced the grim task of clearing the castle of bodies and attempting to return to something resembling normal life. The aftermath of the battle saw tensions emerge between the Northern Lords and Daenerys, between Jon Snow's claim to the Iron Throne and his oath to support the Dragon Queen, and between the need to address the continuing threat from Cersei Lannister in the south and the desperate desire to remain home and recover from the losses sustained during the Long Night. These tensions would culminate in Jon's departure for the south, Sansa's ascension as queen in the north, and Winterfell's return to its role as seat of an independent northern kingdom. After 8,000 years of recorded history and uncounted time before, Winterfell stands as testament to human endurance and the importance of remembering who we are and where we come from. The castle has survived wars, winters, betrayals, and supernatural threats that would have destroyed lesser strongholds. Its survival owes much to the strength of its construction, to the wisdom of Brandon the Builder, who who chose this location and designed defenses that have proven their worth across millennia. But Winterfell's true strength has never been in stone and mortar. The castle's power comes from the family that has held it, from 8,000 years of Starks who understood that leadership means service, that justice must be tempered with mercy, and that survival in the North requires communities working together rather than individuals pursuing their own interests. The castle has thrived not because the Starks were the strongest or the most cunning, but because they were reliable, because they kept their oaths and expected others to do the same, because they never forgot that winter is always coming, and that preparation for hard times must occur during plenty. The crypts beneath Winterfell contain the remains of hundreds of Stark lords and kings, each with their iron sword and stone wolf, each representing a life spent in service to the North. These dead Starks are not merely ancestors, but a reminder of continuity, of responsibility that extends backward to those who came before and forward to those who will come after. Every Stark Lord knows that eventually they will join their ancestors in the darkness beneath the castle, just one more link in a chain that stretches back to the Age of Heroes and forward into an unknowable future. The Godswood and its heart tree connect Winterfell to powers and forces older than human civilization, to the children of the forest, and the old magic that once permeated all of Westeros. The persistence of the old gods in the North, centered in the Godswoods of every castle, but most importantly in Winterfell's ancient heart tree, represents a commitment to remember what came before, to honor the pact that brought peace between the first men and the children, to acknowledge that humans are not the first or only important beings to have walked these lands. The hot springs that make Winterfell habitable demonstrate the importance of working with nature rather than against it. The castle was built where it stands because this location offered advantages that could not be found elsewhere. The heating system that channels hot water through the walls shows sophisticated understanding of engineering and physics. The glass gardens that produce food year-round demonstrate innovative solutions to environmental challenges. These practical achievements, as much as military victories or political alliances, explain how the Starks maintained power across such vast stretches of time. Winterfell's future remains uncertain. The castle has survived 8,000 years, but that provides no guarantee it will survive another 8,000 or even another 100. The Stark line, reduced to just a few surviving members, faces challenges of succession and continuity that could see the family diminish and eventually disappear. The threats that face the North, both natural and human, continue to press against the castle's walls. Climate change, whether toward longer winters or a complete disruption of predictable seasons, could make the region uninhabitable or force massive population movements that overwhelm existing social structures. But if history teaches any lesson, it is that Winterfell endures. The castle has faced existential threats before and survived. It has been held by usurpers and restored to its rightful rulers. It has burned and been rebuilt. It has weathered winters that lasted a generation and battles that seemed to presage the end of the world. Through all of it, the castle stands, the hot springs flow, and the heart tree watches with painted eyes that have seen 8,000 years of human triumph and tragedy. The story of Winterfell is, ultimately, the story of the North itself. The castle represents the region's character. Stolid, strong, enduring, unimpressed by southern sophistication, but deeply committed to duty and honor. The Starks have shaped the North, but the North has also shaped the Starks, creating a symbiotic relationship between rulers and ruled that has survived because it provides genuine benefits to both parties. The lords have provided justice and leadership, while the common people have provided loyalty and labor, creating a system that works because both sides understand their responsibilities. As we look at Winterfell today, restored to House Stark under Queen Sansa after the turmoil of the War of the Five Kings and the Long Night, we see a castle that has been battered but not broken. The repairs will take years, perhaps decades, to complete fully. The population must recover from the devastating losses suffered during recent conflicts. The economic and social structures that were disrupted by war and occupation must be rebuilt. But the foundation remains solid, both literally in the ancient stones laid by Brandon the Builder and figuratively in the determination of the northern people to preserve what their ancestors built and pass it on to their descendants. Winterfell stands as a monument to the proposition that places can embody values, that architecture and geography can shape culture and character, that 8,000 years of continuous history creates something greater than the sum of individual reigns and rulers. The castle is more than just a fortress or a seat of government. It is the physical manifestation of northern identity, a symbol of endurance and continuity in a world where change is constant and nothing seems permanent. The wind still howls across the Wolfswood, carrying with it the scent of pine and snow, and the distant promise of winter. Rising from the landscape stands Winterfell, ancient and enduring, its walls scarred by time and battle, but still standing, still watching, still protecting those who shelter within. 8,000 years ago, Brandon the Builder raised these walls and channeled the hot springs to keep his people warm. Today, those springs still flow, those walls still stand, and the Starks still rule from the seat that has been theirs since the Age of Heroes. This is Winterfell. This is the North, and winter is always coming.